All right, hello everybody and welcome to the OLM community meeting and issue triage. My name is Daniel. I'll be running the meeting today. Let me pull up our agenda for today. Should have done this before the recording, but whatever. All right, so the first item on this agenda for today is to discuss the results of this poll for the meeting times. Unfortunately, I actually can't view the results of this. This is my fault. So this is an oversight on my part. Sorry about that. So we'll probably have to discuss this next week. And I believe Alex is the one in charge of that. I've reached out to him to get those. Maybe we can populate this after the fact with the results. And also, if somebody else has been able to view those results, please let me know now, because then we can go over them. But for my part, at least, I haven't been able to see them. So we'll have to skip ahead of that. And then the next item is to finalize the proposed catalog source repository bootstrapping milestone. So Anik, if you don't mind showing that.
Sure. Do you want me to share screen or do you want to open up? Because I think it should fit into your screen. And
yeah, I can just open it up.
Yeah, so I think in milestone 2, we are mainly thinking about design or finalizing the design and bootstrapping the initial repository for catalog source v1. So I have this issue tracking that jots down both the design docs that are currently in discussion, but I think we are reaching towards somewhat of a consensus. It's a large architecture, so I think it's worth going ahead, even if you don't have 100% consensus yet. But yeah, the design docs are there, and then I think we are defining the acceptance criteria of this milestone as the bootstrapping of the repository. There has been a lot of prototyping that was done as a part of the design docs. So there might be a lot more than just a bootstrap repository, but then I think it's good for milestone to keep this tightly scoped to just bootstrapping of the repository, and then anything on top of that comes if we are able to get any of the prototypes into those repositories polished up and in time ready to go, then I think we'll just look at them as bonus. That's what I've got from milestone 2 for catalog source v1. I don't know if anybody has any questions, suggestions.
So this might delve more into the architecture than we want, but I know right now the design doc is leaning towards having like a custom API server and then kind of a controller as well for doing like reconciling catalogs or CR, and then creating other child resources. Would we want those to be two separate repositories to have some kind of degree of separation between the two, or do we want it to be the same repository? Is there any thoughts on that?
That is a good point, actually. I haven't thought about, I mean, till now I've thought about just bootstrapping one repository, especially because the prototypes, one of the design doc is further along the discussion than the other. And by that, I mean, we've already talked about the delivery mechanism of the content on cluster much depth than we've discussed how we want to get those content on cluster in the first place. And by that, I mean, the OCI artifact conversation, right? We've designed the delivery mechanism with the current system in place, which is OCI images. So at some point, I feel like we might have churn in the repository based off of which way we finally are allowed to. And by allowed to, I mean there are constraints that might be that we might need to discuss in terms of how feasible OCI artifacts are, or what the timeline even is for OCI artifacts to be accepted as the de facto delivery mechanism on cluster. But yeah, all of these design discussion, it seems like it's going to be taking a while before we sort of finalize any of that. So I think it makes it's a fair question. It probably needs to be given a little bit of thought more. I'd say it's okay for us to start off at least in one repository, and then if you see that it's getting ballooned up, with the controllers being, right now the controller is fairly simple. I don't think the the CRDs that we're introducing, those controllers have any code in them at all, because we are basically looking at them as immutable resources that'll at least for the time being have no logic in terms of reconciliation or anything. So with all of that said, I don't know if I just blabbered on without making much sense, but all I'm trying to say is I think it's fine for us to start off in one repository and then think about whether we need to, whether it's more prudent to have a different repository for the controllers and one for the API server. Unless there is a strong argument against that.
Yeah, I mean, my only reasoning for even thinking about having two repositories is just separate, that degree of separation between the two. Because, and I guess like you said, depending on the architecture route, like things can change. So it makes sense to, for now, have them kind of in the same, so that way we can iterate and make changes necessary on both just in one repository. It's not like we couldn't always in the future split that out, but just was food for thought on, how do we want to deliver, the catalog source architecture.
Yeah, no, I think definitely an interesting point, because like we did face this issue where in V0, where we had everything in one repository, and therefore like the package server kind of hides behind everything else in that repository, which is why I think this OLM v1 components are in separate repositories. That's been so clean in an implementation perspective, that I think it warrants at least a thought in terms of, okay, if we do go with the API server route, do we deploy the API server from a different repository and then the controllers from a different repository? So yeah, definitely interesting thoughts, but with just the bootstrapping process, with things being at phase 0 alpha, let's start off with a single repository and then see if we need to, or if it's justified to have different repositories for those API server and the controllers. Cool. Any other questions, suggestions, concerns?
All right. Yeah, if not, then we can move on to our next thing. Naming ideas.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. We'll probably have to, I don't know if you wanna outsource this, or if you wanna create a poll. that should definitely be number one in the poll suggestion if we do end up doing a poll. But no. Yeah, for sure. I think the name package server was specifically designed to get people, the audience of the design doc to think in terms of, okay, this is going to be an API server that we already have implemented in V0, but then it's going to be for Ruckpack resources, or it's going to reconcile with Ruckpack resources, so that it helps, think in terms of, okay, there were like concerns with packet server, so I didn't want people to freak out as soon as they saw packet server. But yeah, that name was specifically chosen to help the audience of the design doc to think in a certain way. But that is served its purpose, and we are ready to come up with a new name. So yeah, at some point we do, or when we do bootstrap the repository, I think that'll be one of the action items that says we need to come up with a better name. And I'm definitely in favor of dog source. Yeah, for sure. Catchy. Anyways, Dan, I'll let you take over now.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm also a fan of dog source, just by the way. So the next item on our agenda was I was going to demo the operator controller release workflow, which we just merged in recently. I'm not going to be demoing this like a live demo, actually releasing the operator controller, because I think that would be kind of silly. We've not fully discussed actually at what point when we'll actually do our first release for this project. But what I can show is a demo of my fork doing a release on here. So here I'm showing my fork right now, and I've got some releases here. You can see, so I did this earlier just because it takes a few minutes for this whole thing to run. Yeah, so what we have so far basically is a number of things. We get extremely minimal at this point. Release page here. We've got installation steps, and then just a change log, which just has commits for this tag. So everything's really simplistic at this point. And also the number of targets is pretty limited. But now that this is here, we can hopefully expand this pretty quickly and get it to where it needs to be, have it do everything we need it to do. So let's see what I'll show from here. I'm just gonna copy all these steps. So to run through them though really quickly, actually no, I'll do this while it's running because it does take a bit of time. So I'm gonna change my share to my terminal. So just one moment. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that. I'm just going to create a brand new kind cluster. At the moment, so with my fork, there's only a few differences from the main brand or the main repo. Obviously, since this isn't a real release, it's not pushing up real images to the real place. What I have it doing instead is just pushing images up to my own Quay repository. But they are actually, the artifacts are actually pushed up and everything. So the main repo should be ready to go to do all the same for the real Quay image registry. I see that comment there. Yeah, so right now the latest on Ruckpack is being installed, and that's a good point. So that ties into a couple things. So one thing that's kind of complicated with this is that it's sort of hard to distinguish, and maybe there really shouldn't be a distinguishing factor between releasing the operator controller and OLMB1, because you can't really run operator controller without everything that's in OLMB1. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, yeah, so we need Ruckpack with this. And then what I was hoping to do with the V1 releases is basically for each main release of OLM V1 is target releases of each subcomponent. So this would not be latest either way. However we're doing our releases down the line, this would be targeting a specific version of Ruckpack. So we don't get this updated under the hood without us realizing. But yeah, thanks for calling out things like that, because there's lots of things like that that need to still be taken care of. I'll go ahead and run this, but talk through it. So first thing is we're installing Cert Manager because that's a dependency of Ruckpack, followed by Ruckpack itself. We wait for all of Ruckpack's pods to start and run and become ready, and then we apply the output from this release, which is this big YAML for installation. And then we just wait for that to become ready. So at this point, we're still waiting on Ruckpack's. Let's see if there was something else I was going to mention. I'm not remembering at the moment. I'll just let this run for now.
I have a question while this is coming
Sure.
up. Is the release process, is it documented? Like if I were to go and cut a release, can I go and read a document and start the release cutting process, or is that still to do in the to-do?
That's we have a little bit on the make here, but this doesn't really count as documentation. It's just more just a comment on the release target. So yeah, that's still a to-do for this. At the moment, though, basically, if we, yeah, exactly, yeah, if you push up a tag, basically, it'll run the release. So there's at the moment, since there's not much to it, that necessarily also there's not much to the process, but that's also obviously needs to be filled out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think in order, I was thinking more in terms of how does, for example, if I was cutting the 0.9.0 operator controller, and that is compatible with the 0.3.0 release of Ruckpack.
Mhm.
I like maybe those sort of things we need. It's not just a git tag, git push, right? Maybe that's
yeah. For certainly for the OLM v1 release as a whole, that's definitely not going to be the case. The process, right? And that also reminded me of what I forgot. I was going to mention earlier. So this installation here is another item we have on our to-do, which is actually documented on the enhancement for the distribution milestone. We want to encapsulate this into a script, and then have that script reference a manifest, and then that manifest will contain exactly kind of like what you're talking about, compatible versions that we're releasing together, instead of just whatever hodgepodge of things and hoping they work together. So every time we do a release, theoretically, we would be selecting versions of each subcomponent, running all of our tests with those together and making sure everything is good. And then at that point, we would cut a release and just basically specify those versions, and reference them in the script, and then the script will install them all for you. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool.
Makes sense.
Is there any other questions? And if not anything for this topic, since this is the last item on the agenda for today, is there anything else just in general that anybody else wanted to bring up? Otherwise, we can end a little bit early. Okay, it sounds like we're probably done for the day then. I'm gonna stop the recording then.